I rise in support of this legislation we're about to consider, the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act, which again is unique insofar as that it is a bipartisan, bicameral piece of legislation to ensure families will be able to afford flood insurance so they can stay in their homes, so that businesses can stay open and property values won't plummet. And I also want to rise in opposition to the Toomey substitute amendment, which would completely undermine our bill and perpetuate a failed policy. While we support putting the National Flood Insurance Program on a path to solvency, current law hikes rates so fast and so high that it will actually undermine the solvency of the program. These drastic increases will act as a de facto eviction notice for homeowners who have lived in their homes and played by the rules their entire lives. That's going to drive down property values as the housing market is struggling to recover. And what's most alarming is the fact that FEMA doesn't even know the size or scope of this problem. They were supposed to complete a study into the affordability of rates increases mandated by bigger waters by last April, but they failed to do so. That's simply unacceptable. Now, while there's no question we need to put the flood insurance program on a more solvent trajectory, we first need to understand the impact that these dramatic changes in bigger waters will have on the housing market and be sure that the mapping process they use to set these rates are accurate. That's why our bill would impose a moratorium on the phase-out of subsidies and grandfathers included in bigger waters for most primary residences until FEMA completes the affordability study that was mandated in bigger waters and proposes a regulatory framework to address the issues found in the study. Now, whether FEMA does that in 6 months, 1 year, whatever period of time, as soon as they do that and proposes that regulatory framework, we're ready to go. So those who say that this is somehow an inordinate amount of time, that's going to be determined by FEMA's promptness in getting the affordability study that was supposed to have been done under law by last April. It would also require FEMA to certify in writing that it has implemented a flood mapping approach that utilizes sound scientific and engineering methodologies before certain rate reforms are implemented. And the reason that's important, Mr. President, is because we saw in New Jersey where FEMA maps were put out and ultimately heard a hue and cry from communities and counties across the state and said, look, that can't be right. We've had properties that have never flooded. Even in Sandy, they didn't have virtually any flooding, and now they're in the zone. And particularly in the most difficult zones, called V zones, where the consequence of being in a V zone may very well be whether or not you can keep your house or not. And when we challenged and brought municipal and county engineers to bear, what did we find? In some counties, we had an 80% reduction. Now, had we not challenged those maps, where would those families be today? So we want the basis of these maps to be scientific and engineering methodologies that are sound. Also, this new legislation would reimburse qualifying homeowners for successful appeals of erroneous flood map determinations. If we're going to say these maps are somehow sacrosanct and you go and challenge them and you find out that they were wrong, you should be able to not have to bear the burden of that. And it would give communities fair credit for locally funded flood protection systems. It would continue the fair treatment afforded to communities with flood-proof basement exemptions, and it would provide for a FEMA ombudsman to advocate for and provide information to policyholders. And it would streamline the registration process for insurance brokers and agents so they can provide better timely services to policyholders during a disaster. Now, just as important as what this bill does is what it will not do. The legislation would not stop the phase-out of taxpayer-funded subsidies for vacation homes and homes that have been substantially damaged. It would not stop the phase-out of taxpayer-funded subsidies for properties that have been repetitively flooded, including the 1% riskiest properties that account for over a third of all claims. It would not encourage new construction in environmentally sensitive or flood-prone areas. And it would not stop most of the important reforms included in Biggert Waters. This legislation reaches a delicate balance that recognizes the need to improve solvency and phase out certain subsidies, but tries to do so without discouraging program participation. Finally, Senator Toomey acknowledges that Biggert Waters, I think, is totally flawed and must be changed, but basically his amendment falls far short of what all of us who have come together to support will do. And I ask the balance of my statement be included in the record, and I yield the floor.